we hold more than one version of a story. I was going to try not to do this, but I can't do this without talking about superheroes. So if you, does everybody know who Spider-Man is? Spider-Man, okay. If you don't like him, but you know who he is. In the last 10 years, there have been, maybe 10, 12 years, there have been 4 origin movies about Spider-Man. 4. All right, and they're all different, but they're variations on a theme. All right, there's some things that don't change. He gets bitten by a spider every single time. All right, but there's a lot of variation, and I was amazed to see that people go to all 4 movies, and they don't object and they don't fight over which one is the right one. They accept this because it is a part of our modern myth. There are things we believe that we all hold true about Spider-Man. So I think the question is not, so the fact that we are able to do that then means it is possible that other cultures with myth were able to hold on to variations of a story at the same time. This drive towards a singular truth in my mind is what's the problem, or the challenge for us, or the thing we need to maybe look critically at, that maybe the things that are most true will require more than one version. It happened yesterday. So yesterday I was fortunate enough to be at the consecration of Bishop Phoebe Rofe in Memphis, Tennessee. And I ran into another bishop who is a former student of mine, Jose McLaughlin. And he told me the story about something that happened that I forgot. I was trying to explain to my students that there is a difference between, that there's always a space between the facts, or what happens, and what we report. That there is no such thing as an objective account, even in this day and age. And so the example I used was a clip from a TV news magazine show that showed the Rodney King beating. They showed the exact same videotape. It was videotape, all right? Video, black and white video. They showed it to a white audience, and they showed it to a black audience. Same beginning, same end. 2 different audiences watched the same thing, 2 very different interpretations of what they saw, okay? This student, Jose, was a police officer. And he said to me, what the video doesn't show is what happened before the camera started. Hear me. We can all observe the same thing and not have the same report. And that what we report depends on where we start and where we finish. So what does that do to our need for facts?
Well, I think we just have a craving for fact and perspective of what is. It's probably unfounded or misfounded on what is true. And that's just the nature, I think, of our culture and of our, how we're raised now. And like that, we have textbooks which are about facts, not textbooks which are about stories.
But our textbooks are factually inaccurate, right? So I'm saying I want to acknowledge the desire for fact, but can we then acknowledge that as much as we want it, we don't have it?
I'm just saying, I think it's hard for us in this day and age to accept that. And I think it might get harder and harder. I think it was probably easier because we didn't know as much, or we didn't know the limits of our ignorance. Maybe that's what I'm saying.
So I'll say one more thing, and I suspect that the more time we spend, so I'm talking about a dialogic approach to Scripture, that Scripture is itself in dialogue. And I would suspect the more time we spend interpreting in communities that are diverse, we would realize just how subjective our stories are. That when we look on cable news at any given moment, depending on who's sitting there, some people will say that's true and other people will say that it's not. And so I don't quite know what to say other than this is something that we want that time and time again we cannot have.
Yes.
The example I used to use was when my kids heard me on the phone and they thought I knew what I was talking about, but they didn't hear the other voice. That's what happens when we're just reading one perspective. And we can do that. There's a long history of people doing that. The invitation is to open up to a dialogue. It's richer. There's more. All right? Thank you.
Go. Any kind of thoughts or reactions to that? I mean, it's kind of been a theme throughout our reading of Genesis that it's, you know, this is multiple stories. In some cases, 4 different people in dialogue with each other. Does that trouble you? Does that give you comfort? What do you think?
I mean, I agree with her that the what we believe is going to be very subjective on what environment we were in or we were raised in. It seemed like the person who responded wasn't getting it.
Yeah, and you know,
Yeah.
the wide picture. Poor Judy. She's often she's in Virginia, so this happened. She's often in context with an entirely white crowd, and in that case, skewing a little bit more conservative. So it's new information for them. I'm not putting them down. I'm just saying they're struggling because it's the first time they're hearing this. If that makes
Even
sense.
when she tried to ask the question differently, he still didn't
Yep.
seem to come around.
She's used to that.
Yeah.
And she deals with it in when she teaches, because she's got these seminarians coming from all over the country, and some of us are from California and eat it like catnip, and others are from Alabama and Mississippi and are struggling, you know.
Mm.
At the same time, what she's saying is to the people from the coasts, you need to listen to all sides of the story, you know. So she's very, it's fascinating how something happened this week in Kenosha happens. We see a snippet of a video. Thankfully, there's a video, but we don't see the whole story. Now there's a rumor that the man had a knife. But at the same time, you know, all this stuff gets murky and everyone goes to their corners. And everyone says then police have a hard job. You know, but at the same time, a man was shot, and why is he getting shot? You know, if he's just got a knife, what you know, is he harming them? There's children in the car. We're only hearing pieces of the story. We're trying to piece things together. The family is on TV saying, please stop looting.
Yeah.
You know, because it's people taking advantage of the situation. It's not necessarily African Americans who are upset and just destroying things for the sake of destroying it. It's people going, hey, great, here's a situation I can exploit. Let me destroy the town and steal. And we just keep falling into this whirlpool. And it's amazing how the problem of lately, I fear for all of us, is that we jump to a conclusion without listening to both sides, and or more than both sides, 3, 4, 5, 6 sides. And we're not, and nobody's listening to each other, you know, somebody's taking a breath. And
well, and don't you think the way the news portrays anything, they give you a 15-second
yep,
something to grab you without the whole story, even as they know it. So it's really hard to watch the news because I never feel like we're getting the whole story. So you have to watch like multiple stations to try to even get what may be the true story.
sure, absolutely. There is one television station that I watch. You could probably figure out which one for the Republican convention tonight and the last 2 nights. And it is, you know, you would expect them to do it, but it's still important. I wish more people were watching. They will let somebody do a speech, and then they will cut back to the anchors, and the anchors will, we just need to fact check what you just heard, because that's not what you just heard.
Yeah.
And that there may be other channels that are just letting it just speak without context.
Challenging it. Mm-hmm.
Well, you brought up a good point that prior to, you said that when the professor is talking to the people from the West Coast, that they still have to listen.
Right.
And so that's why, and so the first thing I thought of was the Republican convention, because as painful as it is to watch it, if I don't watch it, then I'm just going to be like the people I complain about, that they only get their source of news from one source and they're not seeing both sides, because people are saying, oh, the Democratic convention was, there's some really beautiful moments. So hopefully that'll win some Trump supporters over, but then we're saying, well, but none of them are watching it.
Right.
So if they're not watching it, they're not getting the message. So I think there's blame on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing that I thought of when she started talking, and I don't think this is just about not listening with what's going on with the looting and the shooting and the police. I think it's life in general. I think this is how we live it. And a quick example of what came to mind right away as I've been trying to figure this out. I went into a store yesterday, and I've been in there often. It's not a grocery store. And they were not wearing masks, the cashier. And as I walked around this store shopping, they weren't enforcing masks. And it was an antique mall in Morris. And and so I just kept on trying to take a deep breath and just think, okay, no. In every aisle I went down, I saw there were other people in there without it. And so what's ironic, I don't think is the right word. So finally, even though I really wanted to stay there, I walked up front and I said to the two ladies behind the counter, as I stayed my distance, keep in mind, neither of them had a mask on, okay? And I said, can I just tell you that and I wasn't yelling, I just said, can I just tell you that I love coming to True North, and I've been here for years shopping at your antique mall, but I said, why aren't you enforcing masks? And they both looked at me without masks on and said, we are. And I said, but I'm standing in front of you and neither of you have a mask on. Here's the deal, right over their head. No. And then they wanted to argue with me. And I'm like, I said, you know what? I've said my piece. I said, and just keep in mind, both of you do not have your mask on, and you're telling me that you've been wearing your mask. And I walked out. The reason I bring it up with what the lady just, your professor said, is that there's two sides to every story. They kept on saying, but we've been wearing our masks, but they're standing in front of me without it. So it's like,
Right.
It's life.
Right. Yeah, it's true.
There's two sides to every story. They're sure that they were wearing their masks.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's not about the masks.
That's right. That's right.
Mm.
Wow. Well,
I didn't mean to get off on a tangent.
no,
It's just,
hey, I invited the tangent, so
it's still on my heart.
Yep.
That like, what don't you get about it?
I
Okay.
will say the other news, not to just hit on all the news this week, but the story of Jerry Falwell Jr. and what's going on with his, if you haven't, strange kind of alleged sexual relationship with a third party, and he resigned from Liberty. And it was a fascinating piece on the news last night about how this won't matter to white evangelical Christians, that they will still vote for Donald Trump. And I'm not commenting on their vote for Donald Trump, but I just there's one of the things the news I think sometimes neglects to say is they talked about it's all about power. They want to see a powerful leader and all that. And that may be true, but they often forget to say this is about abortion and holding their, they feel like one party is protecting their interests that relate to their faith and all. And that's why they'll stick to the end. And it's often, sometimes we're not listening in the media. We're just demonizing them and just saying they're stupid for following, or listening to Jerry Falwell Jr. and blah, 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 blah. While at the same time, it is true, this was a scrupulous person to be getting your guidance from, it's just so interesting. So it just made me think too, that you run the risk of, especially for those that are on the evangelical side, reading the Bible one particular way, black and white, just the print on the page, one translation, you run the risk of tuning out all the other perspectives and the voices that were intended to be heard in the telling of Scripture. And that's how you get sometimes to a point where you get a story like Genesis chapter 38 kind of interrupting, because it was important to segments of the population to have that story told. So there you go. That was a long intro.
What about, that ties into Andrew's sermon from
Sure.
Sunday.
Absolutely.
That's not important about that basket being going down with the baby boys. So
Yeah. The children's books are always about, it's just like Judy was saying about the textbooks. The children's books all talk about Moses in the basket and neglect to talk about Shiphrah and Puah.
right.
What about that story? That's worth telling children, right? So anyway, good point. Well, previously in Genesis, we talked about Joseph and that amazing Technicolor dream coat. And we're going to find out more about why we call it the dream coat in a little bit. But he was enslaved by his brothers and sent off to Egypt. Remember, he was put in the pit, and then he was found, and then they were sent him off to slavery in Egypt in lieu of killing him. And a couple of the brothers, Reuben and Judah, were kind of walking the others back from the brink of just outright killing Joseph. So we had this continuation of sibling rivalry, which has been there from the very beginning of the story of Genesis. We had chapter 38's interruption, the story of Tamar, who's often just a throwaway as a prostitute, but actually is yet another powerful woman in this book who has the agency to take life into her own hands and manipulates the men who sometimes aren't paying attention. And then we have Joseph entangled with Pharaoh's wife. Remember, we have a bit of a situation where Pharaoh's wife is attracted to Joseph, and then he rebuffs her. It's a bit like, if you can see on your screen, The Graduate. Mrs. Robinson, you're trying to seduce me. All right, I love The Graduate. And then what happens, except the difference here is that Joseph says no, and then you have a woman scorned. Okay, we're moving on to Genesis chapter 40. And remember I said we're going to find out more about why it's called the dream coat. We're going to get into this next situation where Joseph starts to reveal himself as one who can interpret dreams. And remember his dream a couple chapters ago about seeing all the sheaves of wheat bowing towards one in the middle. And he interpreted that as, oh, by the way, brothers, you're going to all be bowing towards me at some point. And that went over really well with the brothers, right? Okay, Genesis chapter 40, and I'm reading from the Common English Bible. Sometime later, both the wine steward and the baker for Egypt's king offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his two officers, the chief wine steward and the chief baker. He put them under arrest with the commander of the royal guard in the same jail where Joseph was imprisoned. The commander of the royal guard assigned Joseph to assist them. After they had been under arrest for some time, both of them, the wine steward and the baker for Egypt's king, who were imprisoned in the jail, had dreams one night, and each man's dream had its own meaning. When Joseph met them in the morning, he saw that they were upset. He asked the officers of Pharaoh, who were under arrest with him in the master's house, "Why do you look so distressed today?" They answered, "We both have had dreams, and there's no one to interpret them." Joseph said to them, "Don't interpretations belong to God? Describe your dreams to me." The chief wine steward described his dream to Joseph. "In my dream, there was a vine right in front of me, and on the vine were 3 branches. When it budded, the blossoms appeared, and its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, so I took the grapes, crushed them into Pharaoh's cup, and put the cup in Pharaoh's hand." Joseph said to him, "This is the dream's interpretation. The 3 branches are 3 days. After 3 days, Pharaoh will give you an audience and return you to your position. You will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just the way things were before when you were his wine steward. But please remember me when you are doing well and be loyal to me. Put in a good word for me to Pharaoh so he sets me free from this prison. I was stolen from the land of the Hebrews, and here too I've done nothing to be thrown into this dungeon. When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was favorable, he said to Joseph, it was the same for me. In my dream, there were 3 baskets of white bread on my head. In the basket on top, there were baked goods for Pharaoh's food, but birds were eating them out of the basket in my head. Joseph responded, this is the dream's interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. After 3 days, Pharaoh will give you an audience and will hang you from a tree where birds will peck your flesh from you. The 3rd day was Pharaoh's birthday, and he gave a party for all his servants. Before all of his servants, he gave an audience to the chief wine steward and chief baker. He returned the chief wine steward to his position, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. But the chief baker he hanged, just as Joseph had said would happen when he interpreted their dreams for them. But the chief wine steward did not remember Joseph. He forgot all about him. Dun, dun, dun. End of chapter 40. Much like there's in the chapter 38 about Tamar, there's a few throwaway lines in there about and the Lord found displeasure and killed them. And it doesn't explain how or why God killed them, really, except that God was upset. You get a throwaway line, basically throwaway example of this chief baker. Your heart is probably going to want to go to, what does this mean that, the baker just gets killed? It's not quite about that. The point of the story is Joseph's ability to interpret the dreams and how accurate he's getting this. He gets the wine right and he gets the bread right too. So that sets up what's probably going to happen next, which is he's going to start interpreting dreams for Pharaoh. Any thoughts on what we just heard, chapter 40? No. Remember in the previous chapter from last week, Genesis 39, Joseph was in captivity, and remember the jailers all kind of fell in love with Joseph, and we're just like, this guy's great. So he's just an interesting character. He just kind of maneuvers through life, and people just can't help but liking him, except his brothers who are jealous of that ability. Everybody loves Joseph. Okay. Chapter 41, I'm going to switch translations, and I'm going to read from Robert Alter's 2020 translation, which is new. And it happened at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh dreamed, and look, he was standing by the Nile. And look, out of the Nile came up 7 cows, fair to look at, fat and flesh, and they grazed in the rushes. And look, another 7 cows came up after them out of the Nile, foul to look at and meager in flesh, and stood by the cows on the bank of the Nile. And the foul-looking, meager-flesh cows ate up the 7 fair-looking, fat cows. And then Pharaoh awoke. He slept and dreamed a second time. And look, 7 ears of grain came up on a single stalk, fat and goodly. And look, 7 meager ears, blasted by the east wind, sprouted after them. And the meager ears swallowed the 7 fat and full ears. And Pharaoh awoke, and look, it was just a dream. And it happened in the morning that his heart pounded. And he sent and called in all the soothsayers of Egypt and all its wise men. And Pharaoh recounted to them his dreams, but none of them could solve them for Pharaoh. And the chief cupbearer spoke to Pharaoh, saying, my offenses I recall today. Pharaoh had been furious with his servants, and he placed me under guard in the house of the high chamberlain, me and the chief baker. And we dreamed a dream that same night. Sounds like Les Miserables. He and I, each of us, dreamed a dream with its own solution. And there was with us a Hebrew lad, a slave of the high chamberlain. And we recounted to him, and he solved our dreams, each of us, according to the dream he solved it. And it happened just as he solved it for us, so it came about. Me he restored to my post, and him he impaled. And Pharaoh sent and called for Joseph, and they hurried him from the pit. And he shaved and changed his garments and came before Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I dreamed a dream, and none can solve it. And I have heard about you that you can understand a dream to solve it. And Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, not I, God will answer for Pharaoh's well-being. Good answer, Joseph. And Pharaoh spoke to Joseph, in my dream, here I was standing on the bank of the Nile, and look, out of the Nile came up 7 cows, fat in flesh and fair in feature, and they grazed in the rushes. And look, another 7 cows came up after them, gaunt and very foul-featured, and meager in flesh. I had not seen their like in all the land in Egypt for the foulness, and the meager, foul cows ate up the first 7 fat cows. And they were taken into their bellies, and you could not tell that they had come into their bellies, for their looks were as foul as before. And I woke. And I saw in my dream, and look, 7 ears of grain came up on a single stalk, full and goodly. And look, 7 shriveled, meager ears, blasted by the east wind, sprouted after them. And the meager ears swallowed the 7 goodly ears, and I spoke to my soothsayers, and none could tell me the meaning. And Joseph said to Pharaoh, Pharaoh's dream is one. What God is about to do. Let's see, what God about to. Hold on. I see. Sorry, I had a right at the good part. I had a confusion here. And Joseph said to Pharaoh, Pharaoh's dream is one. What God is about to do, he has told Pharaoh. The 7 goodly cows are 7 years, and the 7 ears of grain are 7 years. The dream is one. And the 7 meager and foul cows who came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 meager ears of grain blasted by the east wind will be 7 years of famine. It is just as I said to Pharaoh, what God is about to do, he has shown Pharaoh. Look, 7 years are coming of great plenty through all the land of Egypt, and 7 years of famine will arise after them, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. And the famine will ravage the land, and you will not be able to tell there was plenty in the land because of that famine afterwards, for it will be very grave. And the repeating of the dream to Pharaoh 2 times, this means that the thing has been fixed by God, and God is hastening to do it. And so let Pharaoh look out for a discerning wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this, appoint overseers for the land and muster the land of Egypt in the 7 years of plenty. Let them collect all the food of these good years that are coming, and let them pile up grain under Pharaoh's hand, food in the cities to keep under guard. And the food will be a reserve for the land for the 7 years of famine, which will be in the land of Egypt. And the land may not perish in the famine. And the thing seemed good in Pharaoh's eyes and in the eyes of his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, could we find a man like him, in whom is the Spirit of God? And Pharaoh said to Joseph, after God has made known to you all this, there is none as discerning and as wise to you. You shall be over my house, and by your lips all my folk shall be guided. By the throne alone shall I be greater than you. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and had him clothed in fine linen cloth, and placed the golden collar around his neck. And he had him ride in the chariot of his viceroy, and they called out before him, Abrech, setting him over the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh. Without you, no man shall raise hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphenath-paneah, and he gave him Asenath, daughter of Potiphera, priest of On, as wife. And Joseph went out over the land of Egypt. Let me just pause right there. So, first thing to say is that often in the Bible, when you retell something, you give some validation to it. This idea of the dreams, of Pharaoh having 2 dreams, basically means it validates the dream. So the once could be a throwaway. Twice, having the same kind of dream, but with 2 different metaphors, which is what Joseph is trying to tell him. That basically means this is the real deal. And it makes sense. And Pharaoh listens to him. So there you go. So then Joseph becomes kind of like second in command to Pharaoh. It's pretty amazing turnaround, having been in prison before. Any thoughts on what you heard? Or anything in your translations that were a little different? It's kind of a simple story, but it's kind of weaved out really, over many, many verses. That was about 40 verses.
We're back to numbers again.
Yes,
Mhm.
so 7 is just
7.
mainly important because it's the 7 days of creation.
Mhm.
Mhm.
That's often where 7 comes from. So
Yeah.
7 and 7, 14. It's the same amount of years, you may recall, as Joseph's father was it his father? I think it was for Rachel. Yeah, trying to work off Laban's land for Rachel. Ended up being 14.
Mm.
Okay. Would anyone like to read the rest of the chapter from their translation? It starts at verse 46 and goes to the end of the chapter. And tell us what translation you have too. Anyone?
46.
So starting at verse 46.
I'll read.
I-
Oh, go ahead, Pam.
Go ahead, Pam. What do you got? Was it you, Pam?
No,
Was it? I heard a voice. All right.
But Ann can do it. I said I would, but Ann can do it.
Got it. Go ahead, Ann. What translation do you have?
It's the Christian Standard Bible for Study Bible for Women.
Okay, great.
Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Joseph left Pharaoh's presence and traveled throughout the land of Egypt. During the 7 years of abundance, the land produced outstanding harvests. Joseph gathered all the excess food in the land of Egypt during the 7 years and put it in the cities. He put the food in every city from the fields around it. So Joseph stored up grain in such abundance, like the sand of the sea, that he stopped measuring it because it was beyond measure. 2 sons were born to Joseph before the years of famine arrived. Asenath, daughter of Potipherah, priest at On, bore them to him. Joseph named the firstborn Manasseh and said, God has made me forget all my hardship and my whole family. And the second son he named Ephraim and said, God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. Then the 7 years of abundance in the land of Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had said. There was famine in every land, but in the whole land of Egypt there was food. When the whole land of Egypt was stricken with famine, the people cried out to Pharaoh for food. Pharaoh told all of Egypt, go to Joseph and do whatever he tells you. Now the famine had spread across the whole region, so Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe in the land of Egypt. Every land came to Joseph in Egypt to buy grain, for the famine was severe in every land. Is that where you'd like me to stop or
That's
continue?
it. Yes, thank you.
Okay.
So Joseph was right and everything came to be what it was supposed to be, just as Joseph had said. That's the big takeaway. My translation has Pharaoh saying, go to Joseph. I wish it was saying, go, go, Joseph. But, oh well.
I guess the moral is not to spend everything you make. Save for a rainy day.
Exactly. Store up. You know,
Mhm.
you never know. Okay, now we're on to chapter 42, and this will be the last one we'll do for the day because I did want to end with this. I was kind of breezing through the previous ones because this is a nice little button to some stuff we've heard before. Would someone like to read 42, let's see, verses 1 to, this might be a little longer, 1 to 24. Barb, were you the one that had spoken?
Yeah, I'll do it, and I have the message that I'll read
Oh,
from.
great. Perfect.
When Jacob learned that there was food in Egypt, he said to his sons, why do you sit around here and look at one another? I've heard that there is food in Egypt. Go down there and buy some so that we can survive and not starve to death. 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to Egypt to get food. Jacob didn't send Joseph's brother Benjamin with them. He was afraid that something bad might happen to him. So Israel's son joined everyone else that was going to Egypt to buy food for Canaan, too was hit hard by the famine. Joseph was running the country. He was the one who gave out rations to all the people. When Joseph's brothers arrived, they treated him with honor, bowing to him. Joseph recognized them immediately, but treated them as strangers and spoke roughly to them. He said, "Where do you come from?" "From Canaan," they said. "We've come to buy food." Joseph knew who they were, but they didn't know who he was. Joseph, remembering the dreams he had dreamt of them, said, "You're spies. You've come to look for our weak spots." "No, master," they said. "We've only come to buy food. We're all the sons of the same man. We're honest men. We'd never think of spying." He said, "No, you're spies. You've come to look for our weak spots." They said, "There were 12 of us brothers, sons of the same father, in the country of Canaan. The youngest is with our father, and one is no more." But Joseph said, "It's just as I said, you're spies. This is how I will test you. As Pharaoh lives, you're not going to leave this place until your younger brother comes here. Send one of you to get your brother while the rest of you stay here in jail. We'll see if you're telling the truth or not. As Pharaoh lives, I say you're spies." Then he threw them into jail for 3 days. On the third day, Joseph spoke to them. "Do this and you'll live. I'm a God-fearing man. If you're as honest as you say you are, one of your brothers will stay here in jail while the rest of you take the food back to your hungry families. But you have to bring your youngest brother back to me, confirming the truth of your speech, and not one of you will die." They agreed. Then they started talking among themselves. "Now we're paying for what we did to our brothers. We saw how terrified he was when he was begging us for mercy. We wouldn't listen to him, and now we're the ones in trouble." Reuben broke in. "Didn't I tell you, don't hurt the boy? But no, you wouldn't listen, and now we're paying for his murder." Joseph had been using an interpreter, so they didn't know that Joseph was understanding every word. Joseph turned away from them and cried. When he was able to speak again, he took Simeon and had him tied up, making him a prisoner of him while they all watched.
Okay. That's
That's
good part. Yep.
okay.
Thank you. Okay. Hard not to want to relate to Joseph, who's been through hell and back, to want to kind of keep his brothers dangling out there a little bit. But it really is a remarkable story, and you can see a kind of a low-res image on the screen of, the brothers obviously don't recognize Joseph. I mean, this really would make a great movie, or a musical, but they don't recognize him. And he's playing up this idea. He knows they're not spies, but he is playing the part a little bit to string them along a little bit. Interesting, he says, go back and get the younger brother, Benjamin, which is really, really fascinating. It's kind of a big moral story kind of cooking here, and it's going to take several chapters for it to reveal itself, and you can probably guess what's going on, but a very strange reunion with Joseph playing the part of, kind of playing a dual role of not just the brother, but the Pharaoh's assistant, the man in charge of the land, saying, you guys are spies. So what do you think? Have many of you heard this story before?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Mhm.
Our lectionary had, on Sunday, August 9th, had the story of Joseph being put in the pit in Genesis. August 16th had skipped 4 or 5 chapters and goes to chapter 45, which is interesting, which we'll get to next week. But it was interesting. The lectionary isn't interested in this kind of this little dance or game kind of going on between Joseph and the brothers. Fascinating. Well, I guess we can finish this chapter. Would someone like to read 25 to the end of the chapter? Anyone have a different translation, maybe? Okay. Okay, let me read from the CEB then, Common English Bible. Do I have that in front of me? Here we go. Sorry, I'm just finding my spot. We were at verse 25. Joseph gave orders to fill their bags with grain and to put back each man's silver into his own sack and to give them provisions for their trip, and it was done. They loaded their grain onto their donkeys and they set out. When they stopped to spend the night, one of them opened his sack to feed his donkey, and he saw his silver at the top of his sack. He said to his brothers, "My silver's been returned. It's right here in my sack." Their hearts stopped. Terrified, they said to each other, "What has God done to us?" When they got back to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan, they described to him everything that had happened to them. The man, the country's governor, spoke to us with a harsh tone and accused us of being spies in the country. We told him, "We're honest men, not spies. We are 12 brothers, all our father's sons. One of us is gone, but the youngest is right now with our father in the land of Canaan." The man, the country's governor, told us, "This is how I will know you are honest men. Leave one of your brothers with me. Take grain for those in your households who are hungry and go. But bring back your youngest brother to me. Then I will know that you are not spies, but honest men. I will give your brother back to you, and you may travel throughout that country." When they opened their sacks, each man found a pouch of silver in his sack. When they and their father saw their pouches of silver, they were afraid. Their father Jacob said to them, "You've taken my children from me. Joseph's gone, Simeon's gone, and you are taking Benjamin. All this can't really be happening to me." Reuben said to his father, "You may put both of my sons to death if I don't bring him back to you. Make him my responsibility, and I will make sure he returns to you." But Jacob said to him, "My son will not go down with you because his brother's dead and he's been left all alone. If anything were to happen to him on the trip you are taking, you would send me, old as I am, to my grave in grief." Yeah. So the cycle of tricksters in the Bible, the people that are usually in having a lacking of power, it's revisiting now. And Joseph was that one because he was kind of the mama's boy, for lack of a better term. And then this happens to him, that he's put in the pit. Then he's taken to Pharaoh. There's good days, there's bad days, there's good days, there's bad days. And remember, there's a line last week that said, "But God was with him through it all." Now, being the dream interpreter, Joseph has gotten the kind of a power reversal where he's now basically the COO of Egypt. And he's playing the brothers a little bit, and it remains to be seen of what the point of playing the brothers is. Is it comeuppance, or is he trying to teach them a lesson? And that's kind of what we'll figure out next week if you don't know how the story goes. But for Jacob, who's grieving through all of this, I don't want to keep losing my sons. It would be hard not to, if you were in Jacob's shoes, to think, boy, there is a lot of deception and trickery in this family, and I should have seen this coming. Probably.
Yeah.
There you go. Any other kind of thoughts, anybody?
I mean, I'm really enjoying, I really appreciate the story of Joseph, because it seems like every scene is, I don't know, a new lesson or something to contemplate that can relate to your life.
Right. Ultimately, Joseph there's a path for Joseph where he could become a Pharaoh disciple and just, mete out destruction, death, put people to death, and we would understand that if that was happened to him based on the trauma that had happened to him when he was younger, that put him into slavery in Egypt. He's yet to do that, and that there's a connection there between God as being with him. Again, God seems to be in the background of a lot of this, but there's an undercurrent base that God is with Joseph. This is the brother that God is kind of working with, and that's how the original blessing of Abraham is going to sneak through the generations here. It's telling that he's not choosing yet the evil route. But like I said, it remains to be seen. If you don't know what's coming, it remains to be seen if he's playing the brothers to teach them a lesson, or if he really is putting them in a position to do harm. So. And on that note, we will wrap it up for today and resume next week.
Well, thank you, Greg.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everybody.
Come on.
I'll see you
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank
in
you.
prayer in half an hour if you want to join there online. Take care.
Thank you.
How do I stop this meeting?